Welcome to the Ken Willis podcast. This is our newest episode, and today I'm going to try to briefly address something that of all the subjects that I could talk about in any podcast episode, I could talk about politics. I could talk about the war between the states. I could talk about Bible translations. I could talk about prophetic interpretations. I could talk about uh, anything that you can think of controversial, and nothing will top what I'm going to talk about today. Every episode I ever make, ever after this, will never be as upsetting to some as this will be. And I think it kind of illustrates the point of why this is such an important topic. The issue is that of music, actually. Yeah, there are people who agree on the translation issue that will vehemently disagree with one another in the music issue. There are people who will stand beside you in every Bible doctrine. They will link arm in arm with you to defend the King James Bible, and then the moment you bring up music, you have made a mortal enemy. And I think this truly is, obviously it's sad, but it obviously is indicative of what a touchy and a very personal, preferential issue this is. And I don't mean that you can have whatever preference you want. I mean that people will choose their preference in this issue over friendship, over simply just being able to look at objective facts, because the bottom line, as I have found it in teaching on this, in the very limited teaching that I have done on this, because I am not a music expert, okay? But I do read and study a lot of these music experts, especially folks that deal with contemporary music, Southern gospel, Christian bluegrass, any kind of Christianized country, Western style jazz music. We want to make it Christian. And the thing I see over and over again when it all comes down to the bottom line is I like it. I like it. I like it. And that's as far as it goes. That's as far as the conversations go. That's as far as the doctrinal observation of it goes. I like it. Therefore, this is what I'm doing. If you don't like that, take a hike. But this is what I like. And so that's not a good thing. That's not a good stance to have. There are good things that we do like. But just because we like something doesn't mean that it's okay. It doesn't mean we should do it. Doesn't mean that that somehow defends us from doing it. As human beings, we like a lot of things that are bad for us, okay, that are not right. So I like it. To me, that does not work. And I think anyone with a brain and open mind admits that. So I am not going to try to preach through or talk through my book, What Should Worship Look Like? You can find it on Amazon. I will post a link to it in this episode because it does a very succinct job of giving you the overview of the issue, gives you the scriptural principles, which I will, I'll just briefly read on that, just the headlines of these. I'm not gonna sit here and talk about it all night because I actually don't want to talk about it all night. I've got it on the book there for you, and you can look at it. And I think honestly, there's nothing in my book that is really rocket science. Okay, I don't consider it myself to be highly technical on this. Okay, and there are far more educated people who could take you through the ins and outs of music theory on it and demonstrate to you in profound detail why these certain types of music are not right and what's wrong with them. I'm not going to do all of that. I may do a tad at the end of this just to give you some, just to give you a bit of, kind of an example of it. All right. And I'm also going to try to limit that because if I use too many examples, YouTube grabs it and starts blocking my video, which will just be really not cool. All right. We see in Scripture that God does not accept all worship, okay? This is a huge misconception that if I have a pure heart, if I have a a genuine heart and I just worship God and offer him something, he is going to be pleased because I offered it to him. We don't see that, and in the book I go into that in Genesis 4 with Cain and Abel. We see that God does not accept Cain's worship. Even though he was giving him worship, it was not acceptable. It was not what God desired. We do see, and as well, especially Isaiah 6, Revelation 1:10. You can look these references up. That's fine. I want you to. God's holiness demands reverence. You can't just march into God's presence in any old way. And in the same, it's true with worship. You can't just come into God's presence in a service to worship him and just bring any kind of worship you want to. That doesn't work. We also know, I'm thinking of like the one example of Abihu and I think his brother there. They go in and they offer strange fire to God. They weren't doing anything wrong. They weren't trying to, they weren't bringing in some nefarious, sick, disgusting thing. They went in and altered what God had ordained for worship. They just switched some things around very minorly, and God killed them for it. So if God is that serious about even the formula for the fire and the incense, I don't understand how some people think, well, let's just take rock and let's take jazz and country and bluegrass and let's just take it in there and pump it into the church and say, yeah, God will be great and God will love it. That really reeks of the golden calf. And that's coming up here in a second. He does, and in Exodus 32, we see that he does reject worship when it violates his parameters. The Israelites are the perfect example. Let's worship the golden calf. Let's worship God by making a golden calf. We're going to worship Jehovah through a form of worship that is common around us in the world that we're used to. We kind of like what it looks like. We like what it sounds like, what it feels like. We're going to bring that into the church, put holy words to it, put holy motive behind it, and somehow God will be pleased. And in fact, God is not pleased, and many people ultimately die because of that incident. And not only that, God wanted to wipe them all out. And thankfully, God did not do that. Moses interceded, and God had, I don't think that was really God's, God knew that he wasn't going to kill them all, but he wanted to for a moment there. Wow, think about that. So music is not neutral in its morality, and I would highly recommend 3 books to you. Let's see, I think it's Let Those with Ears to Hear by, I think, Kim. Let's see, I have the names here. Actually, let me read you the whole thing. We have the Lost Cause series by Brother James Knox. We have The Battle for Christian Music by Dr. Tim Fisher. Why I Left the CCM Movement by Dan Lucarini. And Let Those with Ears to Hear, got it right, by Kim Smith. And then, of course, my book, What Should Worship Look Like? My book is like a summarized, shortened version of what they say with a different angle, kind of headed more from the scriptural examples. So hopefully some of those books would be helpful to you. But if you want to save your time reading, of course you can get mine. But I would highly recommend Dr. Tim Fisher's book if you're only going to get one of those books. So yes, I would recommend him over myself if you want a comprehensive, in-depth study of it. Okay? So, and Tim Fisher, if you hear this, hopefully you are grateful. No, I know he actually used to be my music pastor, actually, when I was younger. So I'm very, very proud of his book. Let's see here. Okay, so music is not neutral in morality. And if you read Dr. Fisher's book, if you read Dan Lucarini's book, and I believe even in Kim Smith's book, they're going to tell you quite a bit about this. Music is not somehow neutral, and however we use it makes it work. The musical rhythms themselves actually have meaning and actually get our bodies to do things. I think really one of the funniest things to me is to watch in a church service, and this could be in a CCM church, what I would call a boom boom church, a touchy-feely sway type of church, even an IFB church, where, and I am independent fundamental Baptist. I'm not slamming the IFB, but I have to say the IFB is greatly struggling in this area of music right now. This is one of our large, I think obviously there are other things too, but music is a huge battleground in our IFB churches. And there are IFB churches today that are listening and playing things in their services that 20 years ago would have been unthinkable. And yet they're doing it at a breakneck speed. And they're turning it up like heat on a frog in a pan. And people are just getting, what's the word? Getting acclimated to it. And before you know it, you're in full out rock. You're in full out country. And to me, it is country. It is rock. It is the bluegrass. Okay. You can make an argument that bluegrass is just ignorant music from the hills. You can do that. You can say, okay, this is just kind of a folk music, whatever. Fine. That's fine. But there is music that's appropriate for sitting around the campfire, sitting out around the barn, having a kind of a shindig kind of thing. There's nothing immorally wrong with that. But to bring that into the sanctuary in a worship service and say that this is the most reverent, excellent thing I can offer God, to me, you're never going to win that case with me. And you're never going to win that case if you're really honest with yourself. Okay. And again, I know this episode's going to offend some people, and I'm not trying to, but I do know from past experiences in preaching on this or doing public teachings on this that someone's going to get really upset. And inherently, that's going to happen. If you want to go and I want you to just do me a favor. Keep a tab on how many times your church preaches on music, whether that be Sunday school, the service, any kind of conference, and I guarantee you it is going to be the least spoken on topic out there. You are more likely to hear about the Nephilim and the gap theory than you are about music these days. Why? Because it is a touchy issue, and preachers are rightly nervous about speaking on it because they know what's going to happen if they actually take a hard stand on it. They know they're going to ruffle feathers. They may even be asked, they may be moved out of their church. They might even lose their position. That's how serious of a rift it can cause. So, yeah, I mean, there's no way around that. So, all right, let's look at this here. So if you want to know all about how that happens, watch the little kids. That's what I was going to say. My favorite thing to do, and I think it's hysterical, because adults, we can try to hide what we're really feeling inside. If we feel like kind of, doing that, we can hide that because we have what's called tact and self-consciousness. Little kids just start dancing. When they start playing some beady, hoedown music or something, the little kids just start dancing and swaying. I think it's hysterical because they are doing what the music is designed to make them do. Why is that little kid, shaking their head and moving around and doing all kind of dance moves that no one actually taught them? Their body is just doing them. Why is that happening? Is it witchcraft? No, not necessarily. The music is communicating to their body to do something, and they are following the music. They're letting the music move them. Have you ever heard that saying, let the music move you? Well, it does. All music does something to us. Now, music can drive us to a reverent worship. Music can drive us to a celebratory dance. Music can drive us to kind of a swaying kind of this. Music can make us tense. Music can relax us. Music can be very sensual, and a lot of this music is, and I'm going to try to show that briefly. Music of the CCM music, the country style music, the jazz rhythms, all of this is sensual, and that is why people love it. When they say, I love that, yeah, you're supposed to. It's supposed to make you love it, and that's part of the problem. It's like trying to pry a drug away from a drug addict. They say, but I like it. But it's bad. But I like it. Well, again. All right. If you listen, Brother Knox has some good things in his book. Of all the books on it, though, I felt like he probably was the weaker of the writers on it. I don't mean like he was weak doctrinally. It's just he's not as much of a music expert as the other three are. Dr. Fisher has been in music. He has his doctorate in music, all these things. And if you're familiar with David Rosbach, he was a choir director that I trained under for several years, and I honestly owe that man so much in building my music philosophy foundation and just helping it be so scripturally grounded. These are very conservative men. Dan Lucarini was a CCM artist for a while, and he came out of that. He turned his back on that because he realized what it was and what it was doing and what it was doing to churches. And so if anyone has a right to say this, it's people like someone who was in that and then comes out of it and says, look, I was wrong because I knew what I was doing, and I was wrong, and I've repented of it. I don't want anything to do with it, and now I'm here to warn you all about it. You ought to listen to someone like that. All right. Brother Knox does bring out some good points. He talks a little bit about it. He does make a really good point that an instrument by itself is not inherently evil. You can have any instrument you want, and it can be played correctly, and it can be played reverently. That does not happen frequently with certain instruments, especially electric guitars or steel guitars, slide guitars. It's very rare that you'll find someone who plays those things well and who actually plays them in a very reverent, toned down, excellent manner. Not to say that it can't be done, because there's always an exception to every rule. And I've heard people play those things very reverently. Now, it's very difficult for people to play a trap set and a drum set reverently, just inherently to how it is. It is possible, and you do see that in some places. It is possible. So I'm not saying it's not. Now, Brother Knox says we don't use drums in our church because it's just so ridiculously tempting for someone to not do it that way and for someone to play it wrong. So we just avoid it. That's a pretty wise move for a church. I mean, it's like if you know something is going to be a potential problem and you know it has such a reputation for being such a problem, it's probably better to just avoid that. Is it wrong if you don't? No, but it's going to be very difficult. Okay? All right. So he gives us several principles of worship. I won't give you those here because I don't want to take away from his book. But he underlines several things that are important. We must obey what the Word of God says. I think we all would agree on that, hopefully. He brings out the point, and as do all these books, it is not just the music that's important, but it is the words of the music that are important as well. On the opposite hand there, it is not just the words that must be right, but the music as well. You can't take Egyptian worship and put Israelite words into it and make it work. They tried that with the golden calf. It doesn't work. God doesn't care how well you think you've crossed over and made it work. It doesn't work. And God is not pleased. Now, God in his grace is not going to send a fireball down and consume your church or burn you all up or have you kill each other, have the Levites come in and kill you with a sword. That's not going to happen, thankfully. Frankly, if it did, there would be many churches that would be completely wiped out. Okay? All right. All right, so let's look at another guy that I didn't mention in the title because he has so many books on it, and he's prolific in his writing, but David Cloud. I don't agree with David Cloud in every single thing he ever says, okay? But I think overall, David Cloud is probably the most solid down the line in general Bible teacher, expositor, preacher that it is an author and that you can get a hold of his books. I think he's probably the safest one you're going to find. Is he thorough? Yes. My goodness, he's thorough. The man is prolific in his writing. But he talks about this. He says church music must be sound in doctrine. It must emphasize the melody. And he's getting this from people like Dr. Fisher, Dan Lucarini. He's getting this from many musical experts who are trained musicians, not just get up and do what you want. They are trained. They understand rhythm. They understand all of these things, melody, harmony. And they understand that when you're not focused on the melody of the music, when you start getting other counter rhythms and little beats and things that are becoming dominant, you've crossed over into a line where the music is no longer typically a reverent, worshipful thing, you're getting into a very carnal, fleshly, sensual zone that you should not be in, especially in music for worship. And he gives many things here. I'm not going to go over them all, but he talks about the fact that the music must edify, the music must be holy, separate, and distinguishable from that of the wicked world. If the music you're using in your service sounds just like country music or rock music or jazz music or some kind of sensual music that they could listen to down at the bar or the club, do not tell me that God is pleased with that, because you're taking the world and you're shoving it into the church and you're saying that I'm worshiping God with this. God is not pleased. He's not amused, and you should be grateful that his grace is so strong that he doesn't take action immediately on that. All right. I think the last thing he says is, well, he says this. He says we should aim for excellent music that is unquestionably right and safe for worship. God's people should learn and play music. This should happen, but we should also learn to do it with excellence. If there is music out there there's nothing wrong with it, but it is not excellent. It is not appropriate for worshiping the King of Kings. If I come into the church and I start playing She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain, is there anything wrong with that song? No. But it's not appropriate for church. So why would I take the same rhythm and melody and everything like that and then throw spiritual words to it and think, well, I've now taken like this hoedown song and I've now applied holy, holy, holy to it. No. If you read Isaiah 6 and you see think about John. He falls before Jesus. He falls to his face as dead. He's not sitting there picking on his banjo as loud as he can, just trying to have a hoedown in heaven. It's utterly insane to think that that even goes. I don't see how you can even get there. He lastly says, the music of the church is the pastor's responsibility. Yes, that's true. Even if there's a song leader, the pastor's still responsible. I remember when I was assistant pastoring, we had a very strict music policy. Everything, and I know several pastors that every special that is sang, they know what that person's going to sing, and they know how that person sings. There's no surprises. There's not going to be somebody get up and just start playing something where everybody's going, oh my goodness, I didn't know they were going to do that. You have to, and if you don't have time to screen the music, then it probably shouldn't happen. And a lot of men that are screening the music aren't doing it well enough, I think, personally. And I don't think you have to really argue that. Kim Smith gives us some really good comparisons between worldly worship and godly worship. Let me give you an example. Worldly worship uses offbeat or jazz rhythms. Okay, and again, if you don't understand a lot about rhythm and music theory, you can get their books and they will hash this out in great detail. I'm not going to do it here. Okay, godly music uses straightforward rhythms that are simple and they're not this chaotic kind of rhythm. Like that says, worldly music, disorderly. Godly, orderly. Okay? The rhythms used in worldly music is from pagan cultures. If you find the popular music the world likes, you can actually trace those rhythms back to ancient music and actually see, and sometimes the music in the ancient world is not as easy to, there's not a high contrast in a lot of, it's subtle, but it's even more noticeable today. So music today is much easier to discern than ancient music. So the idea that, well, the ancient music sound, yes, it did sound very similar, but there were subtleties that you could know and you could hear, and that the artists of that music were deliberately altering. And so today it is magnified. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a music PhD to be able to tell the difference between rock and a traditional hymn, or bluegrass, jazz, southern country music versus a worshipful, meditative song that's reverent. You don't need to even be 10 years old to figure this out. This is not difficult stuff. Okay? So the idea that, well, I just don't know enough about it, so therefore I'm just going to do it because I like it. That's what I hear a lot of from pastors and leaders. They'll say, well, I just don't know. I'm not an expert in it, so we're just going to play whatever because the folks like it. Okay, that sounds a lot like what Aaron said, the golden calf. The people brought me their gold and told me to do this, and they were all for it, and there you go. Yeah. So worldly music appeals to the sensuality of our flesh. We like the way that feels. I don't mean just sexually. I mean it appeals to, we like that. That makes me feel good. It makes me want to and do some dancing and all that stuff. And godly music appeals to our spiritual nature, appeals to spiritual truth, and encourages purity and self-control. Worldly music tickles the ears and lures us to the church, not to hear the preaching, not to reverence God, but because of that music. It's like the Pied Piper. It lures us in. We're hooked on it. A good test for a church is if you have a lot of people that flock to your church to hear your CCM or hear your whatever kind of music you're doing, don't do music for a few weeks and see if those people still come. Just a thought. Because I'll bet you a lot of those people who are flocking in there, if you take that music away from them, they'll go somewhere else to get it. They weren't there for your preaching. They weren't there for the reverence. They weren't there for the spirit-filled worship. They were there because it was a carnal attraction. It was their weekly hit of high of carnality and music, and they needed that hit. It imitates the lost world versus godly music that teaches us and demonstrates to us that we separate from the lost world. There is a huge, and Pastor John, or former pastor and Dr. John C. Vaughn, in the foreword to Dr. Fisher's book, he writes a wonderful paragraph where he talks about many times we hear, leave your preferences at the door. It's all about the gospel. The gospel, the gospel, the gospel. We have to reach people. And therefore, we're going to use all this kind of music because this will appeal to the people we're trying to reach. And we are willing to do anything. We're willing to lay your preferences at the door so we can come in and get people to Jesus. The problem with that thinking is, while evangelism is very important, it is not the main importance of the church. The main thing with the church is purity, doctrinal, spiritual purity. You cannot sacrifice that for evangelism. Daniel did not go into Babylon to make all of the Babylonians become Jews. He was a Jew who went into Babylon with a purpose in his heart to never become a Babylonian. And by keeping that distinction, he ended up winning quite a few of those Babylonians, including the king, another king, and I'm sure who knows how many around him. Not because he adapted their customs and used their customs to draw them to God, because he showed them there was a difference between them and a true believer in God. All right. Let's see what else she says. Lastly here, it uses sensual techniques. We're going to talk about some of those sensual techniques, and they're here everywhere. You can go in many, and I'm not picking on the IFB, but I am speaking to IFB mainly here because if you're in a CCM church and you listen to hard rock and you don't see any problem with that, I'm probably not going to convince you otherwise. But I am talking to my IFB brethren, and that there's a huge element within the IFB that is headed this way. And I am talking to you and telling you these sensual, seductive, sensual, even sexually suggestive techniques that are used by the rockers and the country bands and the pop artists, they're right here in churches today. I'm going to play you an example in a minute, and I'm going to show you. I'm not going to name which church it is. That's not important because it's all over the place. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of IFB churches who are getting sucked into this. And there are IFB churches that will have nothing to do with it. So it is not an IFB thing. It is a CCM, it is a Christian trap for all Christian churches, but even the IFB is falling into this. And so I'm trying to say there are many IFB churches that want nothing to do with it and that are taking a strong stand on it. Okay, I know several IFB pastors pretty well that absolutely are not going into this. And I am 100% with them. I'm 100% say amen to them. Praise God, they have the courage to actually take that stand, and they're just not putting up with it. They're not being mean. They're not trying to make make some kind of an ugly thing about it, but they're not going to do it. So again, let's go back to the last thing here. I guess she says gives dominance to emotion and pleasure. It's all about how I feel, that I feel good and have pleasure in the service. The service is not really about me hearing preaching. It's not really about me coming before the Lord in reverence. It's about me having a good time. Whether that means, getting up and running around, hooting and hollering, acting like whatever, or just sitting there having like an emotional high. I'm more concerned with that than I am that I actually hear the word of God. That is tragic and catastrophic. And I don't even know how to really begin to help you with that. If that's your attitude, you need to really fall on your knees and ask God to help your heart, because you have done the same exact thing that the Israelites are doing with the golden calf. They're more into it says they rose to play. They got up and ran around and kind of jumped around and hooting and hollering and having a good time, and God is just absolutely disgusted with it, because they're not even really interested in hearing from God. They're not interested in hearing the word of God. They just want to have a good time. That's what the guy down at the bar and the nightclub and the pub, and he's down there at the hockey talk and the boot scoot, they just went there for a good time. They didn't, so it's the same exact thing. It's a very spiritually dead condition, and it's heartbreaking. But there you go. All right, Miss Smith writes on this. I think it's a woman. I'm not even sure, but I think anyway. She says there are sensual techniques. Let's talk about some of these, and I'm going to demonstrate some of them for you, I know, at the risk of my own humiliation. So you have offbeat accents, and what this is, it's very hard to describe this. I'll give you an example of it in a minute to show you that. Conflicting rhythms. You have rhythms that are you have like drums and bass guitars and drums and beats that are kind of conflicting. They're not in sync. They're not, it's a rockish beat, okay? And I'm going to show you that in a second. You then have something called a swing rhythm. This is kind of like a jazz rhythm. It's harder to detect because a lot of people, they think, well, if I'm not listening to jazz music, there's no jazz in it. Wrong. This kind of music, and I'm not against every Southern gospel piece that's ever been produced. I have sang some Southern gospel pieces that are absolutely beautiful and reverent. So I'm not saying you have to take each one and analyze it. You have to take any piece of music, no matter who writes it. You should look at everyone individually. As a general rule, much of the Southern gospel music is that way. Not all of it, much of it is. Okay, so I'm not trying to hate every Southern gospel piece, because there are some, and there are even some that that you might hear it and it sounds really sketchy, but you can actually perform it very reverently and excellently. You can perform I could take Amazing Grace right now and make it sound as sensual as it could be if I wanted to sing it that way, because I understand these techniques. Okay, I could take Holy, Holy, Holy and make it absolutely putrid. It's about the intent of the heart of the performer and their techniques they use. So again, even if it's, you can't take a broad brush and say, well, every Southern gospel song is wrong, therefore every hymn must be right, therefore every song by this composer must be right or wrong. You have to take into account how it's performed. Is it excellent? Is it reverent? Is it using these techniques? Because you can have Elvis Presley sing next to Pavarotti the same song, and it's going to sound very different, and it's going to feel very different, and it's going to evoke different emotions from people. So that's another thing to consider. All right, you have melodies based on strong repetitive patterns. This is kind of like what you get in your songs where you just kind of see people swaying kind of in a trance. It's actually designed to get them to shut their brain off and to switch into this emotional high feeling where you just sort of sway and you just kind of get locked in almost like a trance, and you just and it's usually like sometimes preachers call them 7-11 choruses, because it's usually like like, you're so good, Lord, you're so good, you're so good, and you sing it like 11 to 50 times. Is there anything wrong with the words "you're so good, Lord"? No. But again, the technique there, the style of it is to try to get everybody just to... Now, is that necessarily sinful to sing that? It can be if everyone in the crowd has just got their mind off having themselves an emotional high and they're not even sitting there aware of what they're actually doing. That could be a problem. Obviously, that kind of thing to me, I have seen that in person several times. That tends to get more flack from even IFB preachers than the slight rock and even heavy rock and country stuff does. They'll make fun of that, yet they don't want to address the rock and country. And as a result, I don't remember the last time I've ever heard a preacher preach against country music. And in a minute, I'm going to show you probably why that's the case. Because a lot of the music that's being used now, and yes, even within fundamentalism, even within the IFB, is heavily infiltrated by country and even rock. And so that's probably why they're not preaching against it. All right, now let's get to the fun one here. Sliding and scooping. Okay, so sliding and scooping, you could say, Amazing Grace, that kind of thing. Just kind of all over the place. It's kind of a jazz scoop and a slide. Now you hear women do that. You'll hear men do it too. Okay, I just did it. Men can do it. Typically, you hear women do it. I'm not saying who does it more, but when women do this, it's a very sexual, sensual sound. They probably don't even realize they're doing it. They think that because Sister so-and-so said something, did it, and the pastor said it's wonderful, that's how we should all sing. And so all the girls learn to sing that way, and they think that's how you sing. That's how you honor God. And what they don't realize is they're emulating a very sexual... if you had a woman come up to you in your face as a married man, or, ladies, let's say a woman walked up to your husband and started talking to him. I'm not even going to do it. Okay. But started talking to him in that way, you would say, whoa, woman, back away. That's my husband. Because you would recognize that as a seductive, sensual technique they're using to try to really put their hooks in him. And that is why people love that sound. They love that because it does. It grabs the senses, and not a good way, okay? Again, I'm not saying everyone who does that's trying to do that, but unknowingly even, they are. And some of them do know they're doing it. The ones that make good money on it, they know what they're doing. But a lot of people in churches that do that, they don't even understand what they're doing, but the effect is still the same, okay? Another one is a breathiness and a graveliness. That kind of goes along with what I was saying there. It's just like a really breathy sound. Oh, yeah, hey. I can't even do it as a guy. It's kind of hard to do it. But guys do it. They do it. It just has very... It's a lot of a breath sound, and it's a sensualness. And they think that it's this powerful sound that people are going to just ooh and ah over, and they do because it's sensual. And even if you don't realize that, it sensually grabs you. And that happens a lot. I know, like, some of you are probably laughing at me trying to impersonate this. The graveliness, this is where the guys try to get like that Josh Turner, long black train, kind of like a Sam Elliott sound. And they're trying to appeal, again, maybe not the ones in church, they don't know they're doing this, but they're imitating a worldly technique to try to sensually hook whoever's listening to their voice, okay? And usually the worldly people are trying to stimulate and turn on a sexual sensuality. That's what they do. They say it. Read these books I've told you. These people say this is why we do this, because it promotes sexuality. It stirs up young people. It rams up everybody's hormones and gets them all excited like that. And then we bring it into the church and try to put holy, holy, holy to it. I mean, that ought to make you cringe to hear that, but there you go. And then, of course, a sensual vibrato. This is a lot of like a jazz singer sound, and it happens. And it's right there in the church all the time. It shouldn't be. Shouldn't be. Now, I'm not going to go, well, I mean, I could. I put a chart in the book for generalities. Remember, any song can be sung any way, but generalities, and generally speaking, you can go through the different genres, and you can just look at them and say, like, well, Let me just, pop music's very sensual. Rock music has a tendency to be kind of a violent, angry, sensual, vulgar, kind of a rebellious, like, yeah, dude, rebellious, yo. We're cool. It has that vibe to it, okay? And I'm going to show you that in this example where it makes you want to just, yeah, I like that beat, man. That beat's going on. That should not be in a church, ever, okay? But that's what the music is communicating to you, and that's what it's going to make you do. You might not do it, but your little kid will on the platform. Because he's a kid. He doesn't know better. He doesn't know that that's not cool to do that in church. If he's a little bitty kid, he's just like, yeah, that's what the music told me to do, and I'm doing it, man. And I think it's kind of hysterical that they're basically telling on us. The kids are telling. They're the ones that are telling it. You've got rap, hip hop. It's usually very sensual, vulgar. It's not even music. Okay, we're like, that's not even music. Anyway. Jazz, blues, soul, very sensual. Latin, very sensual and somewhat vulgar. Classical hymns, however, you find to be excellent musically. You find it to be excellently written, excellently composed, excellently performed, majestic, reverent, exalted. So it's not just a vernacular kind of thing. It's an exalted, worshipful thing. It's orderly. You then find folk music. Some of it is reverent. You have, like the Old Rugged Cross, even How Great Thou Art can be sung wonderfully reverent. And it's a beautiful song. It is a very meditative song. It can be also timeless. It can be worshipful. It can. Some of it can be. Some folk music, however, is simply not appropriate for church. If I go in and say, she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes, she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes. And of course, some people would probably clap to it. And if I put the words in, this is not a real song. Jesus is going to come and get me someday. And people would clap to it and think, this is great. It's really not appropriate for worship. It's very low mentality. It's just a very low mentality. It's a very poor choice. Okay. Country music. I won't even talk about New Age because that's just mystical, weird stuff. Country, it's sensual. All country music is essentially about drinking, women, usually in an immoral way, and it's just. There are some country songs that are funny and hilarious, okay, but in church, why would I want to bring that kind of genre that's being sung down at the bar and in the pub and the boot scoot and bring that into the holy sanctuary? Why would I do that? Even if I could make an argument that somehow it was permissible, why would I want to do that? It's just, again, it's a very low mentality of how you view God. It's a very sad indication of what your reverential view for God is. And I'm not trying to be unkind. It's just a simple fact. All right. Bluegrass. Yes, bluegrass is something that moves the foot far before it moves the mind or the heart, okay? Yes, there is bluegrass music that there are people in the hills and in the hollers and in the mountains. They are in their heart worshiping God, and I am not here trying to judge their heart or motive, but it is a very low on the spectrum of excellence when you compare it to a hymn like Be Thou My Vision, How Great Thou Art, Come Thou Fount, and you're going to play something that sounds like the Orange Blossom Special or the Foggy Mountain Breakdown in the middle of church, where you're supposed to be in a reverential focus on the holiness and majesty of our God, and you're going to do what sounds like four redneck guys with banjos getting up, just tearing it up on a stage outside of a barn at a boot scoot. I mean, I don't see how you can mentally make that connection and think that's okay. I know people do, but I don't see how you can. Southern gospel music, and this is typically sung in a lot of black churches, not only black churches, but typically, it is very low quality. It is sensual. It is as sensual as it can get, okay? The words may be decent, but it's sensual. It's not exalted, and it's usually just flat out rock and roll and jazz mixed in with gospel words to it, okay? CCM. Very little of it is good. And again, CCM is a very broad spectrum. So you have to look at it and again say, can this be performed reverently? Are the words actually meaningful? And I don't want to, I'll pick on Lauren Daigle. I don't think much of Lauren Daigle anyway, and I'm just going to say that, and I know that just offended someone. That's fine. I don't think that much of her. I don't think she's some spiritual guide for us to be looking at. But her music, if you listen to it, you could listen to her music and be an atheist and be totally into her music. You could be a Buddhist, a Muslim. You could be someone who absolutely hates God. Listen to her music, enjoy it, go along with it, sway with it, and get into it. It's very shallow music. It's very shallow words, and theologically speaking, it's lacking, and it's just so low mentality, and it's just, why would you ever choose that over something deep? Why would you choose that over something reverent and worshipful and excellent? And in my book, I do compare one of her most popular songs, "You Say." I compare it with another hymn. I don't remember which hymn, and I don't even have the book near me, so I'm not going to go grab it. But you can look at it and see the difference. And I don't think, again, you could be 6 years old and see the difference. You don't really need a degree in music to see that. CCM music, though, there are some CCM songs that, if done properly and excellently, they're absolutely beautiful. "In Christ Alone" is an example. Keith and Kristen Getty. Their music is very sensual. Their music has a very sensual factor to it, but it can be cleaned up and played very well. There are some preachers that say you shouldn't even do that, and I'm not going to try to argue with them, but I'm just saying from an objective music standpoint, you can actually perform those very reverently and worshipfully, and you can perform it in a way that is not sensual. You can do it very properly without sliding and scooping and doing all of the breathiness techniques that she's very proficient at, being breathy. And I'm not trying to crucify these people, but at the same time, they know what they're doing. They're not ignorant. And, if you know what you're doing and you're doing it, you're making a lot of money doing it, you obviously don't care that anyone knows that you're doing it, right? That's a really profound thought, wasn't it? Okay. It's like, I think it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm recording late so that I don't get any background noise. So at 1 o'clock, hey, I give you profound thoughts. There you go. Okay, Southern Gospel, we talked about that earlier a little bit. It is very imitational of country music. If you actually go and study the history of Southern Gospel, and I would encourage you to Google or YouTube David Cloud on Southern Gospel, or go on Sermon Audio, and he will tell you, because he was into all that stuff. He was into country, rock, everything. He was an absolute pagan before he became saved, and he loved all that music. And he will tell you, he is one of the most studied men that I know of. I think I may have contacted him one time in an email. I don't think I've ever actually talked to him, but I've read many of his books and much of his literature, and hours and hours and hours and hours of his preaching and his church history, his music. Dr. Frank Garlock's another guy I would highly recommend you go on YouTube and listen to all of his things. He's dead now, I believe, but man, just incredible. And he will play tons of examples and show you the rhythms and stuff that I'm not going to do in this session. But yeah, Southern Gospel it was actually designed by the Nashvillians in the country music world to make church, quote unquote, more interesting and exciting. So they took country and even rock music, meshed it in, put spiritual words on it, and knew that it would draw people into church, and it does. There are people that go to church just to hear it. That's why they're there. They're not there to hear the preaching. They're not there to hear a word from God or to hear a man of God get up and actually open the Bible and preach. They're there to enjoy the Southern Gospel music. And, there are Southern Gospel songs that are beautiful and reverent, even when they're performed by people we wouldn't even like. So not all of it is the same. I'm not trying to broad brush it, but in general, you do find that if it is true Southern Gospel, it is trying to incorporate sensual techniques and styles of country and rock. More country than anything. Some of it's rock. Most of it would be considered like a soft rock or just a heavy country beat. It's not very, it's hard. CCM and Southern Gospel is hard to go through each. You have to go through each song one by one and just say, okay, I'm just telling you that when you encounter Southern Gospel or CCM, you need to be very careful and understand that the people who write that music are appealing for money. It's money based. These singing groups that go around and stuff like that, very few of them are doing it because they just love the Lord and they're trying to do the right kind of music. They're popular and making money and succeeding doing this because they're incorporating Southern gospel and country and even some soft rock into their music because people love it. They like it. And so very rarely will you find a really good traveling Christian music group that is actually straight down the line on music, because they won't sell anything. They won't make any money. They won't get invited anywhere. So I said what I said. All right. And lastly, there is a test for checking worship music. And this is in my book, okay? And it's 8 steps to it. And I'm going to argue that you should put, and this is kind of put together through many sources that I've studied and read, kind of a just all melted pot together test. Are the words to this song, you should ask this about every song that you're going to use in worship. And I think it's a good thing to use to anything you're going to listen to, especially spiritually, but especially for the worship service. Are the words to this song biblical and doctrinal? There are hymns in our hymn book that we frankly should get rid of. Because if you look at them, they may actually say, I'm not saying a lot of them, but there's a few in there you go, there's no actual doctrine here. Why is that in here? Well, okay. So I'm not just saying because it's in the hymn book, it's automatically perfect. No, you ought to be very evaluational, even in the hymn book. Are the words to this song biblical and doctrinal? Number 2, is this song reverent and glorifying to God? Is it a reverent song that exalts the holiness of God, or is it bringing attention to me, the singer, and trying to use sensual techniques to appeal to everyone's flesh? And that happens just as much in IFB churches as it does in the boom boom CCM churches. And I know somebody's losing their mind when I say that, but I want you to really pay attention next time you hear music. I want you to go away from this podcast, even if you're furious with me, and just observe and listen. And think about what I've said. And just try to listen. All right, number 3. It kind of goes along with 2. Is this song appealing more to my flesh or to my spiritual man? Does this song imitate worldly music or rhythms? Well, now you know a little bit about that. I'm going to show you in a second an example of it. And if the song is imitating it, I don't want it. I don't want Egyptian calf worship being brought before Jehovah. I don't want that. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want that in my church. I don't want to be in charge of a church that lets that happen. I don't want anything to do with it. And if I have to get up and leave, get away from it, whatever, that's fine. I have walked out, my family. I remember even being a young little fella, maybe 5th grade, we got up and we have left several church services when someone comes in and brings a group in, or a singing group, or usually that's when it happens. That's how I've noticed usually a singing group comes through and does it, and then everybody gets their CDs, and then gradually they start singing their stuff and playing their stuff in your prelude music or postlude. You start, and then before you know it, everyone's singing it. That's how it typically happens. I remember walking out as a little fella. I knew it was wrong then. And I didn't have to have a PhD in it. I just knew it was wrong. It made me nervous. It made me feel this is wrong. Like God is upset. We've got to get out of here. And I mean, that has happened several times in my life where no, we're just not going to be here for this. We're not going to sit here, because anything the preacher's going to get up and say afterwards, if he actually preaches, it's not going to cover for what just happened. It's not going to undo that in my mind and heart and spirit. My spirit's already quenched. My worship is already quenched because I've sat through rock or country music and a boom boom sensual thing, and now you're going to get up and pretend like that didn't happen and preach the word of the holy God and act like that's okay. It's not going to fly. All right. Fifthly, does this music contain sensual techniques or sound? Well, now you know a little bit about it. And does it? If it does, I don't want it. Will people respond physically to this song before they respond spiritually? Are people going to get up, jump, and start swaying? Are people going to get up and start, tapping their feet and jiving their head? Or are they gonna go, wow, that is, they're gonna start just, Lord, thank you for this truth I'm hearing. Or oh Lord, I need to pray in my heart because this song is preaching to me through the truth and through a reverent direction to God. Seventhly, is this song an excellent example of music? Okay, maybe there's nothing wrong with it, but maybe it's just a really poor quality choice. Like maybe it's just a really, maybe it's just sounds like somebody's picking at a hay barn somewhere. And is this really the kind of music that God deserves? So no. Lastly, is this song questionable? Is there something about the song where I'm going, if you're feeling that, it's because it's questionable. Things that are not questionable do not cause you to question them, right? If it's unquestionable, no one sits there and says, is it acceptable for me to sing holy, holy, holy? Is it acceptable for me to sing how firm a foundation? You never have even thought that. Why? Because they're acceptable. They're right, and they're excellent, and you know it. Even if you hate what I'm saying, you know that's true. All right, last thing, and I'm going to wrap this up because I am getting ready to go to bed here. And also, I probably should go to bed at some point. All right, let me give you an example of this, and this is going to have a little bit of everything in it. Hopefully, YouTube does not somehow bust me for this. I'm not trying to infringe on anyone. I don't even know who wrote this song. This song to me, though, is just a perfect example of it. And the title of the song, the hymn that they're trying to play is Brethren, We've Met to Worship. Frankly, if I was sitting where this was playing, whoever the sound guy is going to get to meet me, because I am going to go make a beeline for them and be like, hey, I think someone accidentally put the wrong CD in, or I'm going to be nice about it and say, I think something's really wrong. And if they go, oh yeah, I'm going to say, this is unacceptable. Like, I cannot remain in here. This is dishonoring to God. I'm out of here. I mean, I'm not going to fight you. I'm just out. You do what you want. I'm out of here. All right, here we go. I'm going to play it in short bursts so that YouTube doesn't ban me for something. Anyway. That's rock. That's rock. That is a jivey rock beat designed to get you to sway and get people to yeah, woo, get you to start swaying. That's not designed to make you fall on your knees and worship God. That's designed to make sinners act like sinners. If that means get a beer, start dancing with your member of the opposite gender, whatever. There's nothing reverent or worshipful or holy in that. It's unholy, it's sensual. There you go. But yet we're going to put the words, brethren, we've met to worship on it. Okay, let me move around a little bit. Now, there you go. Okay, so you had a little bit of that bluegrass sound there, okay? That's actually the least problematic part of the whole thing. You have that bluegrass sound, not necessarily sinful, not necessarily black and white wicked, but it is not something that denotes a reverent worship. If you think that is reverent, you don't understand what reverent means. You don't understand reverence at all. And you need to, I don't want to insult you, but you don't understand reverence. You need to read Isaiah 6 and picture that song playing in heaven. And if you think that's okay, then we have a lot more problems than I thought, okay? But did you notice then you get that little bit of the rock beat picks back up. So you get that heavy beat. That emphasis is on the beat. And if a little kid's listening to this, which I would find hysterical, they would be up there swaying to it right on beat, because that's what it's supposed to do. Okay? And then if you notice there at the end, that little rock scoopy slidey thing comes in. And that is designed to go, yeah, to tickle the ear and be like, yeah, that's awesome. I like that. Yeah. Get you into it. Not good. All right, let's try to move on here. With a little bit of a jazzy honky-tonk, kind of a honky-tonk country thing to it. There's nothing in that that says holy, reverent, worshipful, give glory to God. It's all appealing to my hands, my shoulders, my neck, and my feet and my hips want to sway, because that's what it's communicating. All music communicates. Let's try to find. That's rock. That's rock and roll. I mean, that's the kind of thing Elvis Presley would get up and dance to. Elvis would get up and swing to that and jam to that. Now, I know today we think of rock music being a little harder, but that's rock. And if you don't think that's rock, you don't understand music. And maybe you should go watch some Frank Garlock seminar, watch some David Cloud, because David Cloud and Frank Garlock play tons of examples. And YouTube doesn't shut them down for it. So anyway, but listen to that. That's not good. Let's get to where they start singing. Let's see here. Hold on a minute. Yeah, now we're going to sing Holy Manna, and I'm going to end that because I'm kind of done with that. The first main thing they sing is, all is vain unless the Spirit of the Holy One comes down. Oh, man. Friends, I just want to say, if the Holy One, the thrice holy, consuming fire, God of heaven, came down and that was playing, no one would be left alive in that building. You understand what I'm saying? If God Almighty came down in that kind of worship environment, and you hear this a lot, like, let the fire of God fall, let the fire. If the fire of God fell in that, there'd be a bunch of charred crisps in that room. So we need to be very grateful that God is as merciful as he is right now, because there would be a lot of charred churchgoers if God was not a merciful God. And thankfully he is, right? But still, God's mercy in not consuming you for doing that is not somehow permission. Oh, well, God's merciful, God's grace. Yes, he is. He's also holy. He's also a consuming fire. He's also righteous. He's also he who cannot abide in the presence of sin. So, yes, this idea that, well, God's just all about love. Yes, he is. But because he is of love, he also hates that which is wicked and does not allow it in his presence. And so there's a very skewed view of God if we think, well, God's okay with it because he's all grace. Wow, how disrespectful and really juvenile someone's theology is if they think that. This has been the Ken Willis Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know somebody hasn't, but even if you haven't, please go listen to the things I've talked about. Get the books. Get the books by David Cloud. Go to his website, wayofliterature.com, wayoflife.com, I think it is, Way of Life Literature. Tim Fisher's book, The Battle for Christian Music. Lost Cause series by James Knox. Why I Left the CCM Movement by Dan Lucarini. Let Those with Ears to Hear by Kim Smith. And of course, a personal plug for me, What Should Worship Look Like by yours truly. They're all on Amazon. You can get them. And if you want the best book on it, though, I would get Tim Fisher's book. And David Cloud has good books, too. And some of them are free. You can get ebooks from his website that are totally free. Listen to Frank Garlock, though, if you want to hear more examples. And he shows some really excellent examples. And he really explains it in much more detail than I can at this time. So I've gone for an hour and only an hour. Okay, wow. But if you've enjoyed this podcast episode, please like and subscribe. That helps me be able to reach more people. I'm not making any money on any of this, at least not now. I'm doing this because I feel like it's important. I feel like we've got to stand. There are IFB pastors who are standing. I want to support them. I want to stand with them. I want to help. And if we can get this out to people, and once people hear this, they are accountable to it. Once you know this kind of thing and you continue to do that, you at that point are no longer ignorant. You are very much accountable to it. You're still accountable even if you are ignorant of it. But now you're even more accountable. And to me, like when I hear things like that, and then I hear the Spirit of the Holy One going to come down, I cringe. I fear, I tremble, I literally quake. I've been in places and heard that, and I've literally quaked and said, you know, that's it. I'm out. I can't be here anymore because I don't want to be here. Because, you know, what if God does come down? It's gonna be bad if he comes down right now. So I don't want the Lord coming back and finding me engaged in that. I just have no interest in that. And it slaughters my spirit. It smites my spirit. It kills my spirit. It quenches my worship, quenches my spirit. And anything that happens after that kind of music in a service is not going to undo what just happened. So, you know, so I implore you to please soul search, to observe. If anything else, let's just say you totally reject everything I said, can't stand what I said, you're mad as all get out, fine. Just observe the next time you hear music in church, anywhere. Just observe and see if these things are not so. Be like the Bereans and go and see if these things are so. This is Ken Willis. God bless you all. It is now 1:15 in the morning, and I am going to bed, and I hope you all have a blessed day, I suppose, now.